Eida might fall, not through weakness, through numbers. Her Senrigan sees everything, past and present unfolding like open books. But what happens when the battlefield floods with so many threats that even omniscient eyes can't track them all? Mamushi's mokuton branches could spawn endless Shinju clones, self-replicating nightmares that overwhelm through sheer chaos. Daemon's reflection ability, the technique that made him untouchable, might crack under psychological strain when 1,000 enemies attack simultaneously and his mind can't process the threat fast enough. If Eida falls, Konoha loses more than a defender. It loses the one person whose perception could predict disaster before it struck. The village that survived wars and invasions could collapse not from a single devastating blow, but from a tide of clones that never stops rising. Mamushi isn't a traditional enemy. He's a cyborg glitch, something that shouldn't exist, and his ability to flood the field with copies of himself transforms every battle into an endurance test Konoha wasn't designed to win. Konohamaru's death might mark the moment the village realizes this isn't a fight they can win through individual strength anymore. The old guard falls, the new generation scrambles, and the Shinju clones keep coming. If what fans suspect comes true, if Mamushi's assault breaks through Daemon's defense and Eida's perception fails to stop the flood, then this won't be Konoha's finest hour. It'll be the chapter where everything they built starts crumbling. But if what we all suspect comes true, this is just the beginning. Eida's Senrigan has been Konoha's greatest intelligence asset since she arrived. It doesn't just see the present, it perceives the past, threading together events and motivations that would take ordinary shinobi years to uncover. That perception made her invaluable for predicting enemy movements, understanding threats before they fully materialized, and providing Konoha with a strategic edge that raw power alone couldn't match. But there's a critical limitation nobody fully tested yet. What happens when the information overload becomes too much? When there are too many threats moving simultaneously for even enhanced perception to track? Mamushi represents exactly that nightmare scenario. He's not a natural Shinju. He's born from a cyborg glitch, something Amato's experiments accidentally created when technology and Otsutsuki biology fused in ways nobody predicted. His mokuton abilities don't just create wooden constructs, they spawn clones, self-replicating copies that inherit combat intelligence and spread across the battlefield like a living infection. One Mamushi becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, each one capable of fighting, adapting, overwhelming defenders through numbers rather than individual strength. Daemon's reflection ability was supposed to counter this. Any hostile intent directed at him rebounds automatically, making him impossible to harm through conventional attacks. But his defense relies on recognizing and reflecting individual threats. When 1,000 clones attack at once, when the battlefield becomes pure chaos with enemies coming from every direction, Daemon's psychological processing might hit its limit. He's still human beneath that broken ability. His mind can only track so many threats simultaneously before the cognitive load becomes unbearable. If Mamushi pushes that boundary, if the clones overwhelm Daemon's ability to distinguish individual attacks, then his invincibility shatters not because the technique failed, but because his mind broke under the strain. Ikemoto's recent interviews hinted at parallels between this arc and previous overwhelming force scenarios. The 4th Shinobi War's Zetsu army, the Ten Tails' smaller spawns flooding the battlefield. History in the shinobi world tends to repeat with escalating intensity. If Mamushi's clone flood is the next evolution of that pattern, then Konoha might face an enemy that can't be stopped through traditional means. You can't negotiate with clones, you can't demoralize them, you can only keep fighting until you run out of chakra, stamina, or will. Konohamaru's potential death carries symbolic weight beyond just losing another Jonin. He represents the bridge between Naruto's generation and the current one, a mentor figure who believed the village could endure anything if its people remained united. If he falls during Mamushi's assault, it signals that the old ways of thinking, the belief that Konoha's spirit alone could overcome any threat, might not be enough anymore. The village would have to confront a harsh truth. Sometimes numbers and relentless pressure defeat even the strongest convictions. Eida's fall would shatter Konoha's perception-based defense strategy in ways that go beyond losing one powerful fighter. Her Senrigan has been the early warning system that gave the village time to prepare for threats. Without it, Konoha becomes reactive rather than proactive, always scrambling to respond to crises instead of anticipating them. If Mamushi's clone flood overwhelms her ability to track and predict, if she's forced to retreat or worse, consumed by the Shinju swarm, then every defender loses the intelligence advantage they've relied on. Battles become chaotic scrambles where nobody knows what's coming next. That psychological shift from "we can see the enemy's moves" to "we're fighting blind" could break morale faster than any physical defeat. Daemon's potential breakdown matters because it exposes the flaw in relying on absolute defense. His reflection ability made Konoha believe they had an unbreakable shield, someone who could stand at the front lines and simply exist while enemies destroyed themselves trying to harm him. But abilities that seem perfect often hide critical weaknesses. If Daemon's limit is cognitive rather than technique-based, if his mind can't process threats fast enough when the battlefield becomes pure chaos, then his fall won't come from someone finding a clever workaround. It'll come from the brutal reality that even the most broken ability fails when the user can't keep up with the demands placed on it. That's terrifying because it means there's no technique, no training, no amount of power that can save you when you're simply outnumbered and overwhelmed. Mamushi's clone strategy represents a shift in how threats function in Boruto's world. The Otsutsuki were individually powerful, requiring heroes to match or exceed their strength to win. The divine trees were existential dangers that needed to be sealed or destroyed through specific techniques. But Mamushi's clones are different. They're a resource drain. Every clone you defeat is chakra and stamina spent. Every moment you fight is energy you can't recover. And they keep coming. It's not about being strong enough to win a single battle. It's about whether you have enough endurance to survive a war of attrition where the enemy's numbers are functionally infinite. Konoha's defenders might realize too late that they're not fighting to win. They're fighting to survive long enough to retreat. Konohamaru's potential sacrifice could become the emotional trigger that forces the next generation to abandon old ideals and embrace harsher realities. He's represented the will of fire, the belief that protecting your comrades and village matters more than your own survival. If he dies protecting others during Mamushi's assault, it validates that philosophy even as it exposes its limitations. You can be the most dedicated, selfless shinobi alive and still fall when the enemy simply has more bodies to throw at you than you have chakra to fight. That lesson, that conviction and courage aren't always enough, could shatter characters like Sarada and Mitsuki who've built their identities around believing the right ideals lead to victory. The connection to Amado's experiments and the cyborg program adds another layer of tragedy. Mamushi isn't supposed to exist. He's a glitch, an accident that emerged from trying to merge technology with Otsutsuki biology. If his existence and the threat he poses can be traced back to Amado's reckless experimentation, then Konoha faces the reality that its current crisis was created by someone they once trusted as an ally. That betrayal, intentional or not, cuts deeper than external threats because it means the village's destruction might have been set in motion by decisions made in desperation years ago. The broader implication is that Konoha's entire defensive philosophy might be obsolete. The village has always relied on having a few extraordinarily powerful individuals, the Hokage, elite jonin, prodigies like Daemon and Eida, who could handle the biggest threats. But if Mamushi's clone strategy proves that numbers and attrition defeat even the strongest defenders, then that philosophy collapses. The village would need to restructure around collective defense, sacrificing individual heroics for coordinated strategies that prioritize survival over victory. That's a cultural shift that goes against everything Naruto built, everything the Will of Fire represents. It's admitting that sometimes the hero doesn't save everyone, and the best you can do is minimize casualties. If Eida really does fall and Daemon's defense shatters under the weight of Mamushi's clone army, if Konohamaru dies trying to hold the line while others retreat, then the next chapter might show us Konoha at its lowest point since the Pain Assault. Except this time there's no Naruto returning to save the day with a speech about never giving up. There's just exhausted defenders realizing they're fighting a war they might not be able to win, and the terrifying possibility that survival might require abandoning the ideals that once made Konoha worth protecting. If this theory about the clone apocalypse proves true, the village's darkest hour isn't just coming, it might already be here, and nobody's ready for what comes after. Retry.